Thank you so much for joining us today for our Race and Ethnicity language workshop in partnership with Black Lives in Music. It's great to see so many familiar faces and new faces in the room. Just so you're aware, we are recording this session, so feel free to turn off your camera if you'd rather. And with that, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Roger Wilson from Black Lives in Music, who will be leading today's session. Over to you, Roger. Oh, you're still on mute.
Brilliant. That's a good start, isn't it? Thank you so much for that introduction, and it's great to be here. It's great to be on this session. Today we're going to talk about the language we use in the context of race and ethnicity. We'll also think about why we should try to think differently about language, as well as how we can make a difference through our actions, our behaviours, as a result of the language we use and conversations that we have. Please get involved in today's conversation. Feel free to enter questions in the chat. We'll either get to them as we go, or there will be opportunities for a brief Q&A at the end of today's presentation. I'm hoping very much not to get thrown off my Wi-Fi, but if that does happen, Gabby will facilitate for a little while until I get back on again, but everything should be fine. There's a footnote to this introduction, which is just to say, please note well, we can't get this done in 1 hour. We're going to finish at 1 o'clock. We may run over a few minutes for those who may have additional questions. But you may wish to think about this activity as a training session, but it is simply a learning resource to catalyze thinking. This is a narrative that needs to transcend today's session. It's very much about you and what you do next. At home, socializing, and in your organizations. Together, we can make change. I'm just going to go to a presentation now, so I'm going to share this with you on my screen. And hopefully we can all see that. I'm hoping we can.
Yeah, that looks great.
Thank you. Okay, so today's session is about helping to build an inclusive community by considering our language and behaviours. Understanding racism is an evolutionary process. Individual reflection is most important in the context of structural reflection. When we're thinking about language and race, we need to understand this in the context of racism. Discriminating unfairly against someone on the basis of the colour of their skin and ethnicity, that's what we're talking about. Racism has evolved into what it is now over many hundreds of years. We need to reflect on our own behaviours and actions as part of the change process that we need to see happen in the organisations in which we work. Racism is not a black problem, it's everyone's problem. Understand this well. The reason why we're all on this call is because we should know that it is incumbent on ourselves as individuals to eradicate racism. But not just racism. It's incumbent on us all as individuals to eradicate prejudice of any sort, affecting any one individual or any group of people. There's a disconnect that comes with privilege. It's hard to walk a mile in someone's shoes, particularly if those shoes are old and uncomfortable, and particularly if there's no reason for you to do so. Being rich can be considered a privilege, but there are many forms of privilege, including, for example, your gender or the colour of your skin. Go out of your comfort zone. If you're in an uncomfortable place, then you are likely in a place of learning. We all have some tricky experiences to fall back on. This might have been a job interview, being involved in a running event, a half marathon or a 10K, or an audition, something like that, for example. Quite often, those difficult situations lead to a satisfactory end where you have learned something as a result. This could be about the way you do something, or you might have learned something about yourself, maybe the reserves that you're able to dig deep in to find yourself triumphing over adversity. It's okay to have the desire to ask tricky questions. It's how we learn. It's okay to ask those questions of yourself as well. The work we do at Black Lives in Music supports the narrative around individuals and organisations learning about the ways they can make change to become more inclusive. Just as importantly, we help support individuals and organisations to make change by initiating actions, some small and some a little more challenging. We're here to support the UK music industry in its work to realise a diverse community of artists and staff. We believe everyone should feel they belong and can make contributions to the music industry with confidence and feelings of self-value. So let's just think about this. We're talking about language, and why are we talking about that? We want to be inclusive. We want to have an inclusive community. And what is a diverse community? Well, it's a diverse group, a community or an organisation in which a variety of social and cultural characteristics exist. So what are the benefits? We bring people together. We have a wider talent pool, brings different experiences and views, different ways of thinking through and finding solutions to organisational issues. So if we're able to have different views and effectively push back on different thoughts and findings, we're able to actually be able to manage our situations and hopefully be better able to manage our organisations and our own communities. Organisations in the wider sector can reflect more clearly and represent more effectively your service users, their communities and wider society. Don't forget, if you, as someone who looks like me, see someone like me in your organisation, it encourages me to be part of your organisation in some way, to be a stakeholder. And of course, more profitability. You've got diverse income streams, and this will make a difference to your bottom line. So if we can't hit you in your heart, then this case should hit you in your wallet. So we want this change because we know that diversity equals creativity, productivity, and positivity. Something quickly about me. And that picture is actually not me. That lovely young person is actually one of my sons. I'm pretty sure that my birth predates the invention of the camera. I've a relatively rich experience in the music industry that spans many years as a musician working across the commercial field. I've also worked as an arts administrator, a tour manager, artist, and orchestra manager. Underpinning my 30+ years in the industry has been a dedicated commitment to instrumental teaching throughout the state and independent sectors at every level. So why do I tell you a little bit about myself? Because I have some lived experience which I think is relevant. It's important to the narrative of change making, and I urge all on this call to invite lived experience to your own tables of discussion. It's possible you may not have lived experience across some protected groups within your organisation. Open your doors and invite people in so that you can have a balanced discussion on making progress with building an inclusive community within your own organisation. Lived experience informs arguments and provides compelling support for the important discussions needed to bring about change. So on the topic of discussion, how do we have those conversations, and how do we approach any individual with confidence that we won't offend? Do we need to reboot our thinking on race? Well, for me, that's a no-brainer. The answer to that has to be yes. Language, it's a minefield. Microaggressions, did you really mean that? We're going to go into these different areas shortly. Language changes. It's just like fashion, and we have to keep up with the times, otherwise we look outmoded. It's really important that we're able to understand what is the language now that we should use in any context to have currency and agency to move within any space. So start with why. Ask ourselves that question. When we use language, ask ourselves, why is it important to us to use that language? And then ask ourselves, how might that make someone else feel? Very often we use language that we are used to, language that we grew up with and feel comfortable with. As time goes by, some language becomes universally unusable and new language replaces it. It's important that we keep up to speed with these changes so that we can speak confidently with all friends and colleagues from across our community. The word coloured, for example, was once considered a pleasant term for referring to a black person. I can certainly tell you that I have experience of being called many things that I would consider probably, I would like to think that most people on this call will either not have heard of or won't remember. Being called coloured was actually a relatively polite term. I still hear it occasionally used by the older generation who think they are being nice with their language. This is why trying to understand why you might use language that makes someone else feel uncomfortable is important. So, names and language. This is clearly a tricky area. If you're working with an individual, then it's okay to ask them how to address their heritage. If you're referencing a collective heritage, please do your homework. Self-educate, show respect when you're addressing collective ethnicity. So, we come to our first acronym, our first term, BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. Originally known as BME, Black, Minority, Ethnic, and it was a term used in the 1970s. The A for Asian was added in the 1990s. So let's look at the A in BAME. Asia, it's a really big place. More than 2,300 languages spoken. There's a population of Asia of 4.5 billion. There are 5 sub-regions: East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Central Asia, and West Asia. I think you're getting the picture. Let's look at Europe. Approximately 225 languages spoken. A population of Europe is 746 million. Pretty much dwarfed by the size of Asia. And yet it's so important that we consider the countries, religions and cultures of individual countries wherever they are. It's really not appropriate just to suggest that someone is BAME, and this is something that I have to tell you now, and it's quite topical that I say it. For once, I know this is being recorded, and I have to admit publicly, I'm going to agree with Boris Johnson on for one occasion here, which is that we need to throw that term out. It's really not suitable for purpose, and I urge all organisations that are represented here to find a better way of documenting ethnicity within their organisations. Minority ethnic, is that Romani heritage, Irish traveller heritage, Jewish heritage, Latinx or people of Latin American heritage. This could relate to people of many other ethnicities. Hopefully it's now clear, BAME, B-A-M-E, is not a helpful acronym. Think about this in the context of your industry. Data is important in understanding communities, their needs, and the need for change. I urge those who have connections either with their EDI groups within their organizations, or maybe you work in HR, please think about this. There is still a bit of latency with regards to the government in using data in a way that is more fit for purpose, but it's important that we're able to start on that journey and make some progress. Looking at descriptors, global majority. This is a collective term that encourages those so-called to think of themselves as belonging to the majority on planet Earth. It refers to people who are Black, African, Asian, Brown, dual heritage, indigenous to the global South, and or have been racialized as ethnic minorities, a term that I'm sure you will have come across and maybe some of you are currently using. Globally, these groups currently represent approximately 80% of the world's population, making them the global majority. If you're struggling, and I've been in these situations sometimes when people are really struggling to find a term that they're comfortable with, global majority is something that is a term that's used quite widely in the UK and is widely accepted. BIPOC, for those who work in different territories, there are nuances of language. This acronym is more common in the US than in the UK. It stands for Black, Indigenous people of Colour. This term, another acronym, originates from the US and it's used to centre the voices of Black and Indigenous communities, those communities that have undergone enslavement and genocide. Now, I come back to that word nuance in terms of language, and you know, just to sort of drill into that a little bit more. I mentioned the descriptor coloured earlier on, and it being a term that we don't use now in the United Kingdom, there's certainly been people in the media who have used that term who have lost their jobs as a result. And yet, when we go across the water to the United States of America, the largest civil rights organization continues to be the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So there are tricky nuances here that we do need to negotiate. I know there are some organizations here that do have an international, if not global, footprint, and as a result, these nuances need to be understood, ingested, and we need to ensure that we are very aware of them. Mixed heritage. People with dual heritage, for instance, people of East Asian and Caribbean heritage, or people of the African diaspora and white heritage. These are just two examples of mixed heritage. But let's face it, anyone on this call who thinks they are of pure blood in terms of their lineage, I think would be either very naive or kidding themselves. It's very common now for people to go to online platforms and find out about their heritage through the generations, and they've been very surprised to find just how many different ethnicities races have been played a part in them being where they are today. So it's an interesting term to use, given that none of us genuinely are of pure blood. There's a footnote here, which is the word mixed on its own, or the phrase mixed race is not a way to refer to someone. There was a time when phrases like these, think regimes like apartheid and other even less desirable phrases were used to describe mixed heritage. They were not always used in a positive or acceptable way, and for those reasons I urge you to take note. Looking at descriptors, but this time negative descriptors. I quite often find that people use these negative descriptors, non-white or non-black. As you can see here, I've put an example for perhaps why that might not be encouraged. If you're a man in a room full of women, would you refer to them collectively as the non-men in the room? It's okay to tell it like it is. I very, very often see people backtracking and double taking when they're about to use the word black. It's fine. You know, that's who we are. We're very proud of what we look like, and I encourage you to not have any reservation about using the descriptor in that context. You'll note that on this slide, I've capitalized the word black. It's not a color. We're not talking about the color black. We're talking about people who are of the African diaspora, and as a result, it's talking about in terms of the collective rather than the colour itself. And again, I would urge you to think about capitalising that descriptor when you are referring to people in that context. So it's okay to ask. Ask people their preferred pronoun. So if you need to, you can ask, how would you describe your ethnicity? Black, African, Afro-Caribbean, or a person of the African diaspora? Asian, South Asian, East Asian, or Southeast Asian? You get the gist. It means something to us. It's precious to us, and we don't simply want to be grouped in some kind of catch-all term or some term that refers to us that makes the individual using it feel comfortable. We need to say it as it is. And when it comes to using your language, don't be afraid. It's okay to make mistakes. It's how we learn. Some of the information that you'll hear on this session today, you'll already know. This is positive reinforcement, I guess, of knowledge. But some of these things still will cause you to stop in your tracks and think, gosh, do I really want to ask this question? Do I really want to say this, make a statement, or how am I going to call someone in terms of their descriptor? And it's all right to make mistakes, and we are in a place now, a zeitgeist, where we know that everyone is open-minded and wants to take this narrative forward. We really urge you to not hesitate. Mistakes are only mistakes when they're lessons that we don't learn from. So please do think about that. Just kick your the brain in, start talking, see where we go. So I had a poem here, which for me I think nicely captivates the nuances of language, and in a way that can help to perpetuate the issue of race in a subtle way. When I was born, I was black. When I was sad, I was black. When I was hot, I was black. When I was sick, I was black. When I was scared, I was black. When you was born, you was pink. When you was sad, you was blue. When you was hot, you was red. When you was sick, you was green. When you was scared, you was yellow. And you call me coloured. I think that really does sum up the way that language can be used as a way of really separating people and discriminating. And yet we're talking about a poem. The poem is by Agra, and just to note, he uses the word black as a colour descriptor rather than a descriptor of ethnicity or heritage. So I want to move on to language in terms of our behaviour, thinking about how it plays a part in our behaviour, and looking at the issue of microaggressions. Now, I've done a number of sessions with different organisations, and the word microaggression seems to be something that takes some people by surprise in some way. Some of you, all of you, I'm not sure. I won't know until we get to our Q&A. Will be familiar with this term, but it is an important consideration in terms of language and behaviour. Microaggressions are everyday situations that take on a derogatory tone due to the verbal or non-verbal actions of an individual. Just to give you an example of one that lives with me for a very, very long time, is one where I can remember being called curly across an orchestra by a conductor pretty much every single time that I went to rehearse and play with that particular orchestra. That received by someone else may not have an effect on them. For me, it was something I didn't take kindly to. This was a person who was in a position of power and was clearly not doing it necessarily to upset me, but maybe to crack a bit of a joke and warm up the room. But certainly it did the absolute opposite for me. So microaggression is a very personal thing, and we need to be very careful about the language that we use in that context, and also our body behavior in terms of the shapes we make and how we address people physically. Our language and behaviour can be affected on the basis of our preconceptions. It can lead to microaggression, a subtle or unintentional discrimination against someone from an underrepresented group. So, here are some more examples of microaggressions. These ones are more general in a corporate context, and we're going to move on to a musical context. But for example, meeting someone of a different ethnicity and asking where they are really from. Certainly, if I had a penny for every time someone's asked me that, I'd be very, very rich. And in fact, I was watching a program on TV only on Saturday where someone, in fact, it was the restaurateur and cook, Andy Oliver, was asked the very same thing. These are not really wonderful ways of greeting people and bringing them closer to your heart. A woman speaks up in a business meeting and after is told that they were being too assertive. A person of colour being told that they are very articulate. I, for one, will not take issue with anyone who wants to put that for me, compliment in my direction, but I'm sure you get the nuance of the messaging in there. A person of colour being told they must be good at maths because of their ethnicity. Again, these are all examples that I've seen. Just going to point number 2, the amount of times that I've had considerations and concerns as to the way I represent myself in a business meeting for fear of being accused or found to be too angry and aggressive in that meeting. So here are some musical examples. Assuming that a musician naturally has good rhythm because of the color of their skin. Assuming that a musician is good at improvising and playing jazzy music because of the color of their skin. Assuming that a musician will prefer to play jazz rather than classical music, again, on the basis of their ethnicity. These are all examples of microaggressions that I've experienced, and not on single digit numbers, but actually on a regular basis. So the relevance of this, the relevance of talking about microaggressions. Well, if we found in our report last year, being black in the UK music industry, if we found that 71% of black music creators have experienced racial microaggressions in the UK music industry, then surely it is something that we collectively should take some responsibility in eradicating and subsequently addressing. Microaggression is a real thing. It's, you know, it's like humiliation and criticism that you know, takes you in, you know, the equivalent of death by 1,000 cuts. It's just that repeated comment that gets you down and puts you in a difficult place. Of course, there is a knock-on effect with this, with regards to your own mental well-being as well. So we've been looking at some of these issues. We've been looking at language. We've been looking at microaggressions, just covering those areas, thinking about that. How can we support people in terms of engaging in discussion? How can we support people in terms of engaging wider communities for them to feel valued? And for me, this leads me to the point where we start talking about allyship. In this context, race equality, but Black Lives in Music are about more than race equality. We think that everyone, it matters. Equality is important everywhere, and as is equity. So we want to talk about that. It's the acknowledgement of our own privilege and learning about the experiences of a marginalized group of people. And Ally will empathize with their challenges and build relationships with that group or individual. Why is allyship so important? Here's a quote that I think really sums it up. What hurts the victim the most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander. It's about those individuals who do nothing, who stand by someone using inappropriate language and doesn't attempt to stand alongside the victim. And this is a really important thing, thinking about what we do. How can we be allies and support everyone in the room? That quote is from Elie Wiesel, who's a Holocaust survivor. So why should we care? Well, it's actually been found that being excluded from a group triggers activity in the same regions of the brain associated with physical pain. And we can see that manifest itself in some of the terrible things that have happened all around the world, particularly in the United States, where we see people going and committing atrocities in schools and other public places with power weapons. Inevitably, those individuals are found to be excluded from society, and as a result, their pain manifests itself in this way. So being an ally, act at all times in solidarity with marginalized and systemically oppressed groups, communities, and individuals. This is not just about people of color. It's not just about ethnicity. Being an ally includes but is not limited to supporting Black, Indigenous, and people of color, LGBTQ+, women, physically disabled, and neurodiverse people. The role of an ally includes, but is not limited to, supporting the group you're allying by letting them speak for themselves whenever possible, not expecting special recognition for being an ally, and not taking credit for the ideas of the marginalized group. I've been in one or two situations where I've had a number of my ideas appropriated by a senior member of the organizations that I've worked in. Again, has a terrible effect on your state of mental health, and I urge people to consider this. And it's not about necessarily letting people speak so that you can respond. Sometimes you just need to listen, and that's really important. The role of an ally includes, but is not limited to, being able to listen and shine a spotlight on those whose voices are often unheard. Recognizing your own privilege and power and using that privilege to lift others up. And when we talk about privilege, of course, we're not just talking about privilege in terms of how much you've got in the bank, how much you've got in your pocket in terms of money, but this could be in terms of, for example, I have a privilege as being a male. That opens any number of doors for me. Probably nearly as many as my color hinders me. Being, fashionably good looking gets you a place at the bar, gets you into conversations that you might not otherwise get into. Having, growing up, having the love of your own family. These are privileges that not everyone has experience of. So we need to think about the privilege that we have, the power that we have, and how we can use that privilege to support other people. And when we talk about power, that's not necessarily being high up in your organization or in your social group, but how can you influence those that are around you? So I urge you to acknowledge there are intersections between oppressed and marginalized communities, resulting in some individuals within groups having more privilege than others. Diversity is intersectional. It's not limited to gender, race, or any other single facet of identity, and therefore allyship needs to be intersectional too. Finally, self-educate and access resources. Help yourself. As I said, this session today, and if you're in an organization where you've done a 90-minute unconscious bias session or a session in language, it's not going to get it done. And it's about doing this kind of learning and engaging in this learning process on a repeated basis. Now, there was an amazing invention now some time ago called the internet, which enables us to really take advantage of so many learning resources. And I really do urge people to either get online, buy books, watch videos, but there are any number of ways to engage in this process, to self-educate, and as a result, for us to be positively and constructively reflective about our own practices, which feed into the organizations that we're part of. So you're an ally. What do you do now? Well, listen, lean in, have conversations, even if it's difficult. Try to remember it's not about you. Don't sit there thinking, at every point you've got to come back with some very, very important thing that helps you. It's about you helping the person who is in difficulty. Don't take this responsibility lightly. It's how we're going to make change together in our organisations, in our communities. Lastly, continue, do everything as mentioned above. Continue to repeat the above. Calling racism out. You don't have to be a protester. Non-aggression is okay. Let people know when their behaviour is inappropriate, and evangelize, spread the gospel. Go out into your constituencies and talk about how we make change, about what you know, and start using your influence so that other people can absorb the narrative and get involved themselves. And sometimes this is even just about, for example, completing some either a questionnaire, or if there's a petition or something, that's you doing your bit. Please do get involved. So use your voice, use your power, show your strength. Proclaiming you are not a racist doesn't get this done. And the amount of times I've been into organizations, I've talked with employees who, the first thing they'll say, there's a defensive position that they take, which starts with, I'm actually not a racist. That's not going to get this done. We need to think about being proactive, being on the front foot, thinking about some of the things we've discussed earlier in terms of using our language, thinking about microaggressions, thinking about our structures in our organizations, and ensuring that we are in fact embarking on a line that suggests we are an anti-racist, that we are on the front foot and being proactive. So the role of an ally includes, but is not limited to being aware of implicit biases that you might have. So implicit bias, what's yours? Height, sexual orientation, name, appearance, religion, disability, race, gender, accent, age, skin color, weight, hand dominance. These are all examples of bias that we may all have. We all possess some bias. It's just something that we have historically. It dates back to the days of ancient man being separated, isolated, and having to protect him, herself, theirself. And as a result, this scenario developed an innate self protection mechanism. And we see that part of the brain that deals with implicit bias, deals with the fast reactions that we have. So, for example, ensuring that we don't cross into the road when we see a speeding car, or if we're in a shop and we see 3-4 shop assistants, which person do we go to help us, to support us? If we go to a party and we're on our own, who do we talk to? Who's going to not leave us sitting there or standing there looking like a bit of an idiot on our own? And this is all to do with who we think looks safest to be with. And as a result, all of these and more that you see on the screen can cause us to have some sort of bias that we don't necessarily acknowledge immediately. So it's really important, take a moment between your initial triggered thoughts and your physical reaction. At this moment, recognize your bias and try to make the right decision. It's that cognitive dissonance that sometimes we have to wrestle with, that conflict between what we know we should be thinking and what we actually do think. We have to really dig down. I'm thinking, for example, even there's a third of the world where the culture is to shake hands with a less of a strong grip. I know that there are certain parts of the world where if you interview for a job, if you shake hands with a loose grip, you're not going to get the job if you've got somewhere near to the appointment process. These are the kind of cognitive conflicts that we need to deal with on a regular basis. And again, that's not explicit to race, but it's also something we should be thinking of across all of the protected characteristics. So where next? What do we do next? We need to keep talking. That's the thrust of why we're here today, thinking about conversations, the content of those conversations, the language that we use in those conversations for us to be able to engage and connect with a wider community that is able to feel valued, to feel that it belongs in that space and is able to contribute with real equity. Work together where you can. Join these conversations up, whether these are internal or whether they're external with other organizations and other groups of influence. It's going to be by working together that we're able to make some progress on this front. And as I say, when we think about this in this context of learning, it's okay to make mistakes. We all have to do that to whichever extent to ensure that we can make some progress. Be assured, the first steps will lead to meaningful actions. Really important to consider this. My experience so far working with organizations is actually those first steps can feel to be quite challenging. There can be quite a lot of talking and discussing and intent shown, but the first steps involve real actions, discernible actions that we can take and understand as moving towards an ultimate goal. And obviously we need to understand what that ultimate goal is, but taking those first steps, and I think there now seems to be a consensus that we spent a lot of time talking. I think in the grand scheme of things, 2 or 3 years is not a huge amount of time, but there's definitely a desire now to move forward with taking discernible actions that will lead to change. So thank you very much for listening. Together we can smash this out of the park. I for some reason decided I wanted to use a baseball analogy for this, and decided to use this smash this out of the park phrase, and looked for some online images that that showed diversity. I went through about 100 and just gave up in the end. So this is an example of how far these blind spots just ripple out into our community and into our wider environment. Thank you. I'd like to open the floor for some questions. I think I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Roger. That was really, really brilliant. I know I learned a lot from that. Yes, if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat. And yeah, let us know. Who wants to put their hand up first?
Did we have any questions in the chat? It's Michelle. Hi, Michelle.
Am I unmuted? Yes, I am. Hello, Roger, Gabby. Thank you very much for putting this on. I really appreciate it. I'm from the London Symphony Orchestra, and it's been about 25 years since the classical sector has been talking about bias and diversity. That's 25 years. So conversation is a good start. But I think we collectively really do need to not only have personal investment, and we've all done that today by taking time out of our busy lives to be part of this, but also influence the people that we work with, the decision makers. 25 years is too long to be talking about things, and I know change will take time over generations and not from one season to the next. But it's time that we collectively start engaging our colleagues. And Roger's given us the tools to start that conversation. But I just wanted to point out, yes, it's good to have conversation, but really it's way overdue to start actually changing hearts and minds and behaviours. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I mean, if I can just come in on that with a comment. So what this looks like for me, just to take that narrative forward, what do actions look like? For me, very, very important that we start thinking about structures. A number of organizations now have diversity action plans. A number of organizations have statements. Those action plans need to be smart. You need to understand what is achievable now, what is achievable in the long term. Start with those easy wins. Make sure there's accountability. So that's not just one person. If you've got an organization with an EDI team or an EDI manager, please don't leave all of that responsibility on those that small group of people. This is actually about us, and this is where I started at the conversation at the top of this session. It's about our ability to be reflective about our own behaviors and our own practices, and to take accountability for this. So I think it's very, very important that we do, if you haven't got an action plan yet, start writing one up, find some support with that. Contact us here at Black Lives in Music. Very helpful to, we'd be very happy to support with that. But that plan does have to be accountable, and you do need to be able to evaluate the actions that you've outlined and the progress that you're making with that. And I think that's a very, very important structure for supporting organizations with making change. I would add to that, and there's a little bit of a cynical aspect of this for me. I think those particular documents have been used in the context of satisfying philanthropists and funding bodies. We need to actually drill down on those documents to ensure that they are fit for purpose for making real strong, discernible progress with the change making we need to have in our organizations. Gabby, I just wondered if there's anything else.
There is a question from Katie from Saffron Hall. Is there something physical, like a poster outlining the headlines from this session? I think having them up in our office for people to see will be useful in keeping us accountable.
Certainly, we can do something with that. I'm very happy to share the presentation. You know, look, this is not a hack to making tomorrow a different day. It's just not that simple. This is about culture change, and I completely hear what Michelle said earlier on. If you think how we've moved culture over hundreds of years in the direction of discriminating people on the basis of their identification and their heritage, we have to understand how long that has taken and what that's involved. So that's involved nuances of language. It's involved physical behavior. It's involved conversations. It's involved structural issues. I mean, think about your hiring practice, for example. Think about your governance, what it looks like. I would be very surprised if there are many organizations represented here who have real diversity in their workforces, within their organizations, within their governance levels, and are still struggling to really make a difference in terms of their hiring practice. This is about real cultural change, and yes, of course, we're very happy to support with any list of takeaways there that anyone might want to have as a keepsake. But don't just keep them on the wall. Think about how you action those recommendations within your own organization. Keep this conversation live. I think Maya.
Yes, you said it correctly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Maya. Thank you, Roger and Gabby, for hosting this. It's really important conversation. So I might be coming from a bit of a different perspective. I'm American, and I've been living and working in East Africa since 2015. And I run an artist management company called Kipepeo Agency. So of course, the dynamic here, I live in Uganda, is a bit different. I work with all Ugandan and Kenyan artists, and even my team I've hired, they're all Kenyans. So I wanted to ask you, of course, privilege is something that I'm very aware of in this space, and the way you said about using your privilege to uplift others. and making sure to always give people a chance to speak for themselves when possible. I just wanted to know your perspective on being a white person owning a company that works with African artists. Of course, I'm trying to do what I can to make sure, you know, we have as many, like everyone is Kenyan and Ugandan in the team. Just any advice you have for me of things to keep in mind. The company is young, it's less than 2 years old. Yeah, just from your perspective.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, something that I think is really important to just spell out here. You know, it's very easy for me to be on calls like this. I do a lot of calls like this, and invariably I will see a lack of diversity on the calls that I'm involved in. It's to be very clear. I'm not asking for anyone to apologise for the colour of their skin any more than I should be apologising for the colour of my own. And I think there can be a bit of fear, there can be a bit of concern and worry when we're talking about making change, knowing that there is a dominant cultural group in the organisation that you're involved in. For me, this is about integrity. It's about integrity in terms of your messaging, in terms of your communications, in terms of your strategy. I see far too many organisations that talk a good game, and then, of course, you know, being in the 21st century, how do we do our due diligence? Mostly online. We look at the communications that are and the imagery and the nuance of messaging that comes out, and nothing that we can see suggests that there is anything more than lip service being committed to making progress. So I think it is really about reflective practice, really looking at deep down inside what you're doing, and as I said earlier, bring lived experience not into your organization just at ground level or at artist level, but bring people in at a higher level, so that one, your organization is diverse, but two, you have a real rich conversation that enables you to be able to police yourself, police your organization, check itself. That is in part why I talk about governance and the lack of diversity that we see at governance level being a problem. Just specifically with orchestras, for example, how many orchestras do a skills audit with their own boards, and will cover them beautifully, but yet they will have a lack of perspective that's essential to developing your audiences. So I think these are the kind of blind spots that we regularly miss along the way, and I think it's about really having integrity, and I'm not necessarily throwing shade on any organizations individually here, but I am suggesting that sometimes, you know, we've had 2-3 years where we've been able to sit in lockdown and twiddle our thumbs and navel gaze, and then what happens when the sun shines? It's time to make hay, and as a result we can lose this narrative, and we need to make sure we keep focus on it.
Okay, any other questions from anyone before we wrap up? We've still got a little bit of time.
Michelle's coming back.
I don't want to dominate, sorry, but I'm just so excited. I'm so excited that you put this on, you know, at last. Thank you, Roger and Gabby. And also thank you to the Association of British Orchestras, who are bold enough to even put this kind of topic on their agenda during lockdown. I nearly fell off my chair when I saw it. I was so happy. But during lockdown, we were all trying to survive. It was a difficult time in the music industry. We couldn't perform. Some of us were almost went out of business. So we were concentrating on just survival. But this is all about resilience and being able to survive in the future. Our audience numbers are dwindling. They're getting older. We need to reach out more. We need to develop our audiences more. So the onus is on us to change, not expect other people to change. So only last week, Roger kindly attended, we had a gospel, classical, symphonic gospel concert, and I brought a group of 92 people who'd never even been into the Barbican before, because they felt it wasn't their place. They felt it was unwelcome. Oh, only white people go there, affluent people, rich people. And when they came into the space of the Barbican, they were in awe of just space, and it was free to go in. They didn't even know that. And to actually sit in an auditorium and listen to a symphonic sound, real live music, was mind-blowing. And that experience wouldn't have happened without us really looking at our diversity, equity and inclusion, but not just producing the plan, but actually doing something about it and making it mandatory right across the organization, not just for the champions who feel it's personally something they want to believe in, but right across all the organization. All of our staff have had to undergo unconscious bias training, which I've carried out. So they actually feel it's relevant now, rather than maybe 3 years ago when I would mention it and then eyebrows would go to the ceiling, and then I'd lose contact with people because they'd zone out. So people now feel it's really, really relevant, and it makes a difference. And not only that, the orchestra themselves, who are visibly white but come from 23 different nationalities, were blown away themselves by the reaction of working with such a diverse group of people. So it works two ways. I'm going to shut up now, Roger. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. And I completely applaud you on those points, and pick up as well on the point that Maya has just made in the chat as well. It is about getting out. It is about building relationships. It is about connecting with people. Again, when I get on calls like this, I'm never surprised in terms of when I'm thinking about diversity, how it presents on the calls that I'm involved in. Now I'm on the inside. I work with a lot of organizations and I know a lot of people, but for those people who are effectively disconnected from our industry, they do have a perception, and whether that's right or wrong, and it's down to us to try and connect with that wider community, to change that narrative, and to really engage with that wider community for all of the reasons that I've mentioned earlier. They're all the right ones, whether we're talking about social conscience, or whether we're talking just the business case. There's every reason why we need to make more effort, get out there and get involved with the wider community in a more visceral way. Kelly, I can see, has got her hand up as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you again for, organising and delivering this session. It was fantastic. And you know what? It's actually really amazing to see so many people on this call as well. So Absolutely. I just want to say thank you to everyone, because it just means that there is a real change happening. I think the second thing I wanted to add, maybe from Maya's conversation, is about the need for more kind of senior diversity in senior positions, but also the idea of supporting diversity to be able to get into those senior positions with skills and mentoring and training, and then to share those ownership spaces as well.
Absolutely. It's such a great point. And, of course, I've been into so many organizations where people are talking about being more diverse, but it's definitely at ground level and not enough in terms of senior level. And my concern, and I shared this concern with the live EDI group earlier on a meeting, is that actually we have to be worried about that glass ceiling and the fact that we get those, we get diversity in at ground level, but people get despondent as a result of not being able to make progress. So we do need to work, from my point of view, in a kind of pincer maneuver to ensure that we are championing talent at senior management level, as well as providing opportunities at entry level. And it's simply not good enough to sit there and say that people are not coming through and applying for jobs. We have to be proactive. We need to find out why people are not applying for jobs and provide pathways and opportunities at a younger age. We're simply not doing enough of that, getting into schools and really showing people that they can aspire to be people in our industry. And I think in my own context, in my own sort of career, I consider the progress that I've made more despite the problems and obstacles, rather than as a result of the support that's been there. So I think we really do need to be very proactive about supporting at that level. Thank you, Kelly.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap up now unless anyone has any further questions.
Gabby, can I just jump in and say, I think there are about 170 people on this call, and I can't believe that 165 people didn't have questions. It's normally the way that generally people have got lots of ticking time bombs sitting there in their brains thinking, I really want to ask this, but I'm not sure I can. I get it. If anyone does want to reach out directly, then Gabby knows how to reach me. It's okay to talk. I've been waiting like a long time to have conversations, so I'm very happy to talk with people when they're ready to do that, and hopefully let's not leave that too long.
Absolutely. Brilliant. I'm just seeing a flurry of messages in the chat, but I think they're all thank you messages. Thank you so much, Roger. That really has been amazing. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. I know everyone's super busy, but obviously this is such an important topic. And yes, the session will be available online. There'll be a link to that. And yes, this is going to be this is the first of hopefully many EDI workshops hosted by Live. So please do keep an eye out for more to come. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.